We are here to talk about the book Spooky and Weird, a collection of weird fiction and poetry. And these four people, along with myself, are all contributors to the book. So we're going to go around. We'll start with RC, and you guys can introduce yourselves, and then we'll come back around after that and talk about your contributions to the book. So go ahead, RC.
Okay, I live in Massachusetts, the Miskatonic Valley to some of you, and I moonlight in grocery retail, but my main calling I feel is writing spooky stories, fantastic stories, just anything that's weird and wonderful. So I share my home with my family and a small parakeet that we just adopted, and I also have like over 3,000 books and counting. And I also share our house with some eldritch things that rattle in the walls when I'm trying to write. So we're just going to say I'm surrounded by strangeness, and I have learned to embrace the strange.
Sorry, I'm just hearing from MK here.
Yay!
He's been running late. I don't know if he's going to make it in or not, but
That's okay.
okay. So, and you belong to Horror Writers Association, right?
Me? No,
Yes.
I actually
Well, I
belong
thought you
to
did.
the New England Horror Writers, which is like a local sort of group for authors that are based out of New England or specialize in writing stories set in New England. So
Oh, okay, that's what it is.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
confused by that.
Yeah, I won't say they split away from the Horror Writers Association, but there was kind of some disagreement between them and how the HWA was running things at the time. So they thought, okay, let's do our own thing. And they're a very nice, close knit group. And I found them about 6-7 years back, and it was interesting. They did an event at a local library in our town. It was a horror writers festival where a bunch of them came in and talked about their books and sold, had their books for sale and whatnot. And I just got chatting with them, and one guy said, I talked about how I've been writing since I was knee high to a knee, and on and on and on, whatnot. And he says, well, how come you're not published yet? And I said, well, I work retail. That takes a lot of my time and energy. It can be a little rough sometimes, so don't always have the spoons for publishing. And he says, well, how long have you worked retail? And I said, well, I've worked retail for 13 years. He looks me in the eye and he says to me, if you can work retail for 13 years, you can get published. And so a light goes on in my head, and I'm like, well, why the heck not? So I challenged myself right then and there. I said, okay, Christmas, Thanksgiving and Christmas, the December holidays are coming up. It's going to be wacky and weird, so we're going to hold off till the new year, and then we'll see about trying to get published. So I started, come January of the following year, I start looking around online, looking for open calls for stuff. I find one. I write a thing for them. I send it off. Don't hear anything for a little while. Start writing another thing, send it off to somebody else. Get a rejection for the first thing, and I was like, write a passage. Not everything is going to stick, right? So I sent off a short story to, I believe it's Atlantean Publishing, which is based out of England. I think it was the 125th anniversary of H.P. Lovecraft's birthday. So he put together a small anthology for that, and I sent him, a little small piece that I just kind of wrote on the back of an envelope, and he absolutely loved it. Got it published. That's paper. No, that's not Paper Mass. I think it's The Shop Around the Corner, and that's published in, I think it's Beyond the Wall of Death, Lovecraft at 125. So that basically was the door that opened, and I since then, which was like August of 2015. Since then and now, I have 106 short stories of varying lengths published here, there, and everywhere with a whole bunch of independent publishing. So
I knew I published quite a few of yours, but not 106.
no, no, I
Nowhere near.
just keep cranking them out. I mean, I keep getting ideas and I keep sharing them. So I always have more than one iron in the fire going. So that's why I'm able to crank out as much as I have in such a relatively short amount of time.
Great. That's awesome. I had no idea you had that many published works out there. That's great. So, Heath, what about you? Why don't you share some of your history with everybody?
Sure. Well, I've been running for a long time as well. I actually run a machine shop here in Northern Illinois. 24 employees and lots of machines. So that's my day job. But I've been writing since I was a kid. I was the weird kid that wanted a typewriter for Christmas. I've had a few things published. They're kind of all lined up behind me here, but I've done novels. I actually started my own boutique publishing imprint. We published 91 titles. We do some stuff where we had to purchase intellectual property. We do some of my own stuff, and then we do some other stuff that's in the public domain that hasn't been redone in a zillion years, and it does really well. I call it the play money thing because, I mean, obviously we don't make a lot of money, but I'm a collector of rare books, especially association copies, things like that. Got a couple. I've told the Stephen King story before. Got a couple that Stephen King. Oh, okay.
Okay. I think you're getting some
feedback
there. Can you turn your speakers down? Are you still able to hear? Too much. I think you can't hear. Can you? Or can you? You can? Okay. Cool. All right. So go ahead, Heath.
So that's basically it. Yeah, I enjoy writing. I haven't done it for a while. I was married for 25 years to a wonderful woman, and things just kind of changed. And I haven't really written much since my divorce, although I have gotten back into it of late. I've got 2 novels in the pipeline actually, and I actually just did a sideline short story for the Rockford Area Writes anthology, which I think J.P. Reinfleisch is putting out through the Rockford Area Writers, and it's a charitable work. So basically, all the money that's raised pays for the book, and then thereafter it's used to fund a Rockford Area Writers kind of a kitty for events and things like that.
Nice.
That's pretty much it. I'm not that interesting.
I would disagree with that, but okay. Elizabeth, you're up.
I am a ninja and a super spy, and I cured cancer last week. Terribly interesting. No, I live in St. Louis with 2 cats and a hubby, and I call myself a writer, I guess. I'm working on it. Besides the short works that I've published, I've got a wonderful trilogy of books, also through Gary Hill and Tales of Wonder and Dread, called The Suffering Sequence. The first 2 books, A Girl's Gotta Eat and Old Blackwater, are out right now. The 3rd and final book in the trilogy comes out in late November. I've done some work in the game industry, tabletop role-playing game stuff for Margaret Weiss Productions. Did some colorist work. Did some small colorist work like coloring comic books. And tried to get into the small press comics back in 2,000 years ago. What else? I play with Legos. I tell terrible stories of gruesomeness. That's about it.
And you have kitty cats, right?
2, yeah, wonderful cats. One of them came up and had just, when she drinks, she sticks her head under the water fountain. So she gets her whole head wet and she comes up and shakes off on me. It's like, what a wonderful, refreshing shower.
Nice.
I love them. I love them dearly. So.
Okay, Dan, why don't you go ahead? I'm sorry. I figured you were done. So, Dan, you want to go ahead?
Sure, yeah. I just moved to Louisville after retiring from 30 years in public radio. I was on WNIJ in Northern Illinois, where Gary, MK, and Heath live. So I've been down here since May. I've been writing since I was 16, but only recently had some success, not monetary success, mind you, but reviews and invitations from bookstores and that kind of thing. With my vampire novel that came out a few years ago now, Fiona's Guardians. I'm working on the sequel.
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, MK, you're up.
Hey, everyone. I'm MK. I've been writing since I was a kid. always wanted to be a teacher and a writer. I just got my MFA in creative writing from Northwestern. Um, I just started getting things published about 2 years ago, and so I'm relatively new. Got like 5 or 6 short stories out there. Nowhere near the 100, but I'm getting there. A little bit at a time. And yeah, it was a really great honor to be published among all of you. It's really cool. I really like the bash that's in these books, so it's awesome.
Nice. Well, I guess I should probably, just in case somebody doesn't know who I am, I mean, I do all these. I figure everybody has always already heard this stuff so many times, but I've been writing in some capacity for over 25 years now, because I started Music Street Journal 25 years ago, and then did a lot of freelance writing, wrote for All Music Guide. I think I've written, 1,200 articles for All Music Guide, maybe more. I show up on there. I'll do some research on a band sometime, and I'll go look at a bio on there, and it's like, oh, I wrote that. I forgot that. And then I started doing short stories and things, and started Tales of Wonder and Dread 5 years ago, which is what these are. This is part of the 5-year anniversary of Tales of Wonder and Dread. So, and that's it. That's it in a nutshell for me. So why don't you talk about your story in the book?
Okay, the story that I have, Source of Ignition Unknown. I got the idea for it originally when I was at Necronomicon Providence, which is the big all H.P. Lovecraft and weird fiction convention that's in Providence like every other year. I believe that was back in 2015. Yeah, 2015. So, and there was a panel discussion about sort of taking almost like modern contemporary slants on the usual trope of, the weird eldritch book of weird eldritch magic. And somebody dropped the notion of, either like a book lurking, some kind of eldritch tome lurking in the deep web, or selling, these dangerous tomes of lore over, via deep web transactions. So I got the idea for that, and I was just kind of tossing it around. Plus, I also kind of had the notion of, the whole nonsense from the Satanic Panic era, tabletop role playing games, or they will open doors to the devil. Oh, so because I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, I was a kid when Dungeons and Dragons was big, so I was a little young for the target audience for that. And my rather conservative mother was like, stay away from Dungeons and Dragons, it's dangerous, blah blah blah. And I was like, I had no interest in it really, because I mean, the creativity intrigued me, but the whole, keeping track of your points, your points and your different stats and whatnot, that just threw my head completely sideways. So I just had no interest in it, but I liked the idea. So I was kind of rolling this idea around in my head, trying to come up with the notion of, how to put, Eldritch Tome from the deep web together with tabletop role-playing games. And I got the idea of, okay, a group of bored LARP kids somehow stumble on a book and decide, we're going to use this tome that does actual Eldritch magic, and we're going to use it as a splat book. And things go horribly wrong. We're going to leave it at that, but it was a fun story that I had. I had a blast writing this one. I actually had it published in a small journal. Cannot remember the name of it. It was a really small, semi-regular e-zine that was Terror Tract. That was the name. It was in Terror Tract. I published it under the title "Not Intended for Use as a Splat Book," which was a funnier title than really fit the story, which wound up being a little dark humor at first, but then it just goes completely into, this is really happening sort of territory. So I changed revamped it a bit, changed the title. The magazine went out of print, so I decided, okay, I'm going to try to find another home for it. And sure enough, Spooky and Weird shows up, and I'm like, oh, this is perfect for you guys. I figured, send it right off to you. I knew you'd absolutely love it, and I'm glad that it has a home in print once again. It's I'm not gonna say it's one of my favorite stories, but it's one that I had a lot of fun working on, just sort of working in all sort of little details. I based the main character off a composite of about 5 or 6 different people that I know. And there's also 2 side characters. They originally appeared. I had like a wraparound sort of bookend, beginning and ending, involving my 2 I would say semi-frequent, but 2 characters that tend to pop up, kind of on the sides in some of my stories, which is a pair of FBI agents who investigate very strange cases. And no, they are not Mulder and Scully. If you compare them to Mulder and Scully, one of them will get mad at you, and the other will be trying not to laugh his head off because, But I won't say this was the first story that they showed up in, but it was one of the first stories that they showed up in. And originally they showed up at the beginning and at the end, but then I decided it worked better just having them at the end. Meanwhile, the rest of the story is basically the protagonist trying to explain to them, why some mysterious fires have been happening. We're going to leave it at that, but it's been a lot of fun. I had a blast writing it, and I hope people have a blast reading it because it was just, very peculiar story, but a very fun story and a very dark, just kind of. I just kind of just went for the thrill ride with no brakes on it, just writing this thing, and I think it shows, it shows marvelously in it.
Let me say one thing before we get to Heath. A couple things actually. I want to preface, just comment on one thing and then preface Heath's with something else. But it's kind of interesting that you just talked about redoing it after the first publication because you felt it worked better with taking off the introduction part. And that ties very much in. Elizabeth and I did one of these with Eileen Eggert the other night. And one of the topics we got into after we were done talking about that is how, you can never get your stuff exactly perfect, and you don't strive for perfect. And a lot of times you can go back and find things that you would rather have done a different way. And sometimes you can actually redo that. And that's a perfect example of that. You looked at the story again and thought, this would work better this way. And I think that's really an important thing for people who are just getting started writing to understand. It's probably never going to be perfect to you. In fact, it shouldn't be perfect to you, because if it is, you probably don't have anything else to prove or any way to grow as a writer. And it's always cool to go back and revisit them and redo it maybe if you have a chance. Because we grow as writers, hopefully. Hopefully we're gradually getting better. Practice does make perfect, and not perfect, practice makes better. So, I thought that was an interesting point that you made on that, and I thought we should bring it up. Just because it ties into the other conversation the other day. And the other thing that ties in nicely, now StreamYard sort of throws everybody up wherever it decides to throw them, and I just decided I would go clockwise, which works out really, really well, because your 2 stories, yours and Heath's, are both about ancient books that have really bad consequences. So it's appropriate that Heath goes right after you do. So Heath, why don't you talk about your book, your story?
So Exponential is something I wrote. It's kind of an homage to it. I don't know if any of you are aware. First of all, if you've never read Neil Gaiman, you need to read Neil Gaiman. Get on top of that. So, by the way, his band just put out a CD. I just got it today.
Nice.
I haven't listened to it yet, but I got it today. So back in the day, he wrote a book called Angels and Visitations. It was with Kitchen Sink Press. Most people haven't even heard of it. He doesn't even list it in most of his publication lists, and I don't know why. There was a story in there called "We Can Get Them for You Wholesale," and basically what it was I don't want to give away too much, but the story's old. If you haven't read it by now, it's probably your fault. Basically, somebody wants to kill somebody, and so he calls a number, he finds a hitman, and the guy says, if you do 2, it's a little bit cheaper. And he goes, "Oh, really?" And so eventually it gets to the point where he's like, "Yeah, just kill everybody," and they're like, "Oh, we've been waiting for that." Everybody's gone. It was crazy, and I just read that and went, "This is stupid. I love it." And so I love books. There's no secret of that. I love rare books. I love old languages. I love strange gods, which is why I love writing the Unseen Universe, because it basically just ties together every god and every concept, and everything is all basically commodified, and they are alive and kicking, and we're just too stupid to see them, which is great. You can do a whole lot with that. And so in doing that, I'd never really written anything serious about ancient languages or ancient civilizations. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could tie all these things together? And I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what really set me off. But one morning I just got up and I started hammering this story out, this exponential story. And it was an homage to that story. And what I found out later, I didn't know this beforehand, was there's a Japanese anime series called Death Note, which if you haven't seen, you really need to see because it's fantastic. And I was like, oh, this is kind of in that same vein, really. And so it's meant to be a story about how far you can take things if nobody is telling you you can't. You know, what are your own limitations? How far are you willing to push things to get your own way? And there is a redemptive quality to the story. I wasn't sure how I wanted to end it, but I ended up ending it with a redemptive quality, and I think it tied together nicely in that regard. But it was a fun story to write. It really was. In fact, I hadn't read it in a number of years, and I just happened to be rereading it here before this, and I found myself engrossed once again, which is, to me, about the highest praise I can give to myself, because I'm so self-critical. So when I can read a story and I go, oh shit, I wrote that, it's, I don't know, I appreciate that. So it means I did something right, I think. But that's, I don't know, that's really about it for me.
I think the distance, for me anyway, the distance from when I wrote it to when I'm reading it again has a lot more to do with I can look at stuff less critically when it's been a long time since I've written something. If it's too fresh, it's hard for me to see it without being critical of it, overly critical probably.
I'm looking at it when I reread my stuff. If I get sucked into it as a story, because I've forgotten what I've written ultimately. I mean, I get the gist of it, but I don't remember what I've written. If I get sucked into it, then I feel like I've done something right. And again, I don't mean to self-aggrandize at all. That's not where I'm going with that. What I'm saying is, if I get sucked in, and I'm hopeful that other people are reading it that way as well, and that makes me feel good about the story. Because as you say, you can always strive for perfection, but you're never going to achieve it. You just aren't, and you need to accept that, because if you don't, you're going to make yourself nuts.
Yeah, and you'll never publish anything if you don't.
No,
you'll never send it anywhere. You'll be the only person who ever reads it. You know.
Yeah, which is a poverty.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, we come to you. I think you have. I'm getting sorry, but I'm getting confused at what is in all these books, because I put so many together.
Yeah,
at once. You have more than one in here. I know. Oh yeah, you have.
Yeah, I have 4. I had to write them down.
Yeah, no cards.
It's not just.
I had to get early. I don't remember which. I dumped, I don't know, 9 or 10 stories on Gary all at once. Because it's like, I've got a bunch of books, and I'm just like, here, figure out what you want to put in which volumes. In this one, I've got 4 short stories. The first one's called On Account of Murder, and it is about, I came up with a sentence that described it. Jen doesn't work for the crows, and that's the best way to describe it. Is this woman has a relationship with a murder of crows, or the crows don't work for Jen, right? Because in the story you find out that she works for this group of crows, a murder of crows, and it's it started with the idea somebody was doing experiments where they were getting crows to pick up things to feed them peanuts, and the crows started bringing coins, and it's like, well, if you bring coins, then you get better food, and it kind of goes from that idea into the hilariously brutal and like, okay, they're a little more organized in their organized crime now.
I love it.
This extremely organized crime.
Very organized, yes.
Oh,
And
Mafia.
yeah, exactly. And it's, well, you have to read the story. The second story is called Kenopsia, and it's a very simple story, a fairly short story. The word kenopsia means that weird feeling you get when you're in a place that's usually crowded but is empty, like a train station or an airport at night when there's no one. And I wrote this story because I wrote this story because I had this feeling. I was in downtown St. Louis at night at one point, and there's no one. It's the weirdest thing. It's a major metro city, and there's no one around. There's an occasional car, and it kind of made me feel icky. And I wrote a short story about that fear of suddenly finding yourself alone in the whole world. The third story is called The Huskarls of Njord. There are two gods in the Norse pantheon that deal with water. There's Aegir, who is the god of the raging deep sea, and there's Njord, who's the god of friendly harbors and commerce and that sort of thing. And this is the thing where a sailor takes off and they'll throw a coin into the water and ask for a blessing. This is what happens when someone steals those coins that are given to the gods for blessings.
Uh-oh.
The last
Crows. So is it crows?
It's crows. The crows get you. It all comes around.
All crows.
The last story.
Crows all the way down.
Yes.
The last story
I was thinking
is
that.
called. I've lost track. So the last story is
We all
called,
have.
the Dreams in Which I'm Dying is the last story, and it's about a woman loses her friends to some heavy drug stuff, and fights her way through the gates of death to try to bring them back.
Wow.
Yeah, that one almost.
And
That one I thought
Go
about
ahead.
a content warning for the drug stuff, but I didn't ultimately.
It
do
is.
It.
Yeah, it's a. I got the seed of the idea for that from watching a video on the trank epidemic in Philadelphia, and
Oh,
people
yeah.
just shambling around like zombies with body parts rotting off, and it's like, if
Ouch.
that's not hell on earth, what is?
Mm.
So
Yeah, I've
that's
heard
it.
this. I've heard those people. You can smell the rotting flesh when they're around. That's like zombie stuff. I mean,
I was gonna say.
Yeah, crocodiles like that too.
yeah. All right, so that brings us
That's
to
it.
Dan.
Okay. Well, the one story that I got published, thank you, Gary, is Not Dead Enough. It borrows two characters from my vampire novel. Daniel is a middle-aged amputee. He's missing his right arm, and he is now he's made a career out of being a guardian or caretaker for vampires. And his latest vampire is newly created, high-strung, very reckless, named Camilla, who was sired by Fiona from the previous novel. And what we have here is the scene. The story opens up where Camilla declares a crisis. Hey, I've done something terrible, and Daniel has to go out and find out where she is and what she's done. Turns out she has exsanguinated a person who she was, I guess, on a date with, and it turns out that the person is an off-duty cop. And so prompts the initial crisis, sort of an inflection point in the relationship between Daniel and Camilla, because he's got to clean up the mess, and he's getting a little tired of her antics. And at some point, we find out that this cop comes back to life as a revenant, and Daniel has to go kill him. And this precipitates another crisis where, essentially Camilla will eventually come after Daniel. So he flees to the equator. That's pretty much where he's going toward the end of the story. But before he leaves, he tracks down this newest vampire, because this creature will just keep on killing and killing and killing. And all that will do is attract attention to, the vampire that Daniel was previously protecting. So he's a professional. He has to do this. But of course, it puts him at odds with vampire law and Camilla's desires to have a son, as it were. So that's where the story goes. And this story will be the opening chapter of the sequel, which, yeah. So.
Nice, and it does a good job of standing alone, so that's good.
Oh, great! Yeah.
Yeah. So MK, your story is. I found your story really crazy, man. So
I think, which one was this was the Dragon Slayer, or is this
Dragon Slayer. Yeah.
okay? So this one, a man slays a dragon, and by doing so, he becomes beholden to it, and so he has to take care of it, and it takes the shape of a person to fit inside of his house, and it's the story is just him repeatedly trying to find ways to murder the dragon permanently.
Oh boy.
After it's eaten his wife and threatens to eat other various family members. And so he tries numerous ways to murder the dragon to no avail. And then he accidentally poisons himself with cyanide at the end. Because he poisoned the tea. He poisoned the milk for when the dragon drinks tea, and then he accidentally kills himself with it.
I love the dark sense of humor and how it's a total twist on the whole Dragon Slayer mythology, and I love that about it.
Thank you.
Sounds like a dark comedy of errors.
It very much comes across that.
Yeah, I have a really dark military sense of humor, so it shows through in my writing a lot. And a lot of people are either like all for it, or they're like, "Whoa, that's a little bleak." I'm like, "It's not bleak. It's funny."
It is very funny.
How's your resistance to iocane poisoning at this point?
It's pretty great.
So I guess I should mention the stuff that I've got in here. I think your speaker. Oh, you got him turned down again. Okay. I've got a story that appeared in the Halloween book that I did last year. It's called The Halloween Intervention, or Halloween Cthulhu and Blood Drinkers Oh My, which is actually, it sort of ties in both Lovecraft and vampires, because there are a group of vampires in Rockford, Illinois. Well, one of them's in Rockford, and he draws a lot of the other ones into Rockford. And because there's a new threat, there's a Lovecraftian cult trying to do a ritual to bring back the old ones, which of course would be a very big threat to the vampires. And so first they're trying to investigate and then trying to figure out how to stop this. So I think it's kind of a cool story, because I think it brings the whole vampire mythos in and the Lovecraftian thing. And I know I've talked to Dan about this a little bit. I've been gradually doing vampire stories, just one here and one there, and they're all in a shared universe. And I intend at some point to do a book that unifies them all into sort of one book. And it's going to be this grand story, but it's going to be all the original stories, which are told by different people and, in different ways. And that one fits in there. And I've decided, I hadn't decided this until after I wrote this one, is that one's going to be sort of a beginning, because there's going to be a lot of Lovecraftian mythos creeping into it afterwards. And that's going to be sort of the piece of where it starts. And I've already started the story that takes place after, but I haven't gotten it finished yet. So I've got that story in here. I've also got another Lovecraftian story, which was, I think, one of my first stories that ever got published anywhere. It's called The Debut Tour, which is where a reporter from I visioned it as Rolling Stone, but I wasn't going to say Rolling Stone. Some magazine is doing a piece on this band that's on their first tour, and he's traveling with them, and they've got a whole hype of, their heralds bringing back the old ones, and he just thinks it's complete hype. But then really weird things start happening around, and that story is actually, it's actually was my attempt at doing a complete Lovecraftian thing, because I went with sort of the thing of, he's trying to scribble the story down as fast as he can, because he knows they're coming for him and he wants to make sure the world finds out about it. So, that's that one. And then I also did a bunch of Lovecraftian haikus in here because I wanted to get some poetry in there, and I've never really done haikus before. So I found I was playing around with it, and I was really enjoying it. And I figure I'll go ahead. You've got to sort of understand Lovecraft to get these haikus, but I think if you do, you'll appreciate it. And I'm guessing you guys, most of you have probably read a decent amount of Lovecraft. The one I'll read is hold on, let me find it here. I think it's probably my favorite, and probably because it's based on one of my favorite Lovecraft stories, The Statement of Randolph Carter, and it's called Warren is Dead. Graveyard in the swamp, secrets beneath the surface. Now Warren is dead. So yeah, that's just the idea. There's five little Lovecraftian haikus in there. So we kind of wrapped up the stuff about the book. Anybody got anything you would like to chat about? Because I've got some ideas, but if somebody has something that really came up that they'd really like to talk some more about, we can do that.
I just have a vampire question since all you vampire people are here. Has anybody ever done like an ironic vampire story with a vampire named Capri Sun? Because I think that would be funny.
Capri Sun, yeah, I love
Capri
that.
Sun. Oh my gosh,
I love that.
That would be cute. That would be cute. I almost want to steal that idea.
Knock yourself out. If you don't, Christopher Moore will. So
I'm kind of getting the image of like, I don't know, like almost like a kind of a punk manic pixie dream girl sort of vampire. Think what's her
Petty and Tank Girl.
I'm almost thinking oh gosh, what's her name? Delirium from the Sandman comics, only she's a vampire.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that kind of, you know, you're random and crazy, but there's its own screwy logic to her randomness, if that makes any sense at all, you know?
Yeah.
You
you can still use that trope of, you know, the sun burning vampires, but just having her wear pancake makeup all the time.
Yeah,
you know, when
exactly.
she goes out. And she's young, she likes to party, so she likes to, you know, get out into where all the people are at because where the music is, and she, you know, that kind of thing. That could work.
There's only one Capri Sun.
Yeah, you know what I found really funny is when you were talking about that, for some reason, I flashed on a vampire story that I had read before, and I was trying to think, what story was that? Who wrote this story? And then I realized it was one RC wrote that's in one of my other books, because I flashed on the fact that she's got a character in one of them who was like a junkie or an alcoholic before he became a vampire. And so he tries to get people who are wasted to drink their blood so that he can catch that buzz for a moment.
Oh yeah, Lonergan. Ned
Yes,
Lonergan.
I love that.
He is a train wreck of a vampire. I actually have a whole short, I think it's novella length. It's getting published from somebody else. My old friend Aaron Crocker, I think, is doing it. But yeah, I did a whole novella with him and his sire, and it's like they are a pair of train wreck vampires. And I just had fun with. I mean, a lot of modern vampires, you know, they're very emotional. They're very, you know, in touch with their heart. They're
Twilight.
They're soulful vampires, but these two are just bonkers. They are just, you know, it's kind of like it's kind of a return to the vampires as monsters, but they're also very human even while still being vampires. It's like I kind of with his sire Artemisia, I kind of took the trope of sort of the Victorian goth vampire and then just completely turned it on its ear. It's like she might look pretty and ladylike, but oh god, is she ever nasty? And Lonergan isn't any better. I mean, he's, you know, like you said, he was a junkie and an alcoholic before he was turned, and now he can't get a buzz from drinking alcohol or using drugs because his system just doesn't process it like a living human being's would. So he has to find somebody who's, you know, exactly, just, you know, it already has the stuff in their system so that he can process it that way. which was kind of, I think I might have lifted that idea from something or other. Okay. I think I got it from that sort of romantic vampire movie that was out a few years back, Only Lovers Left Alive, where it's almost like vampires are having a hard time finding like people who don't have some kind of pharmaceuticals or something in their system to drink because the pharmaceuticals don't agree with them. But I decided
pollution.
Yeah, exactly. So
Vampires against Zoloft.
Yeah. Oh God, a vampire on Zoloft. That could be interesting. I don't want to play with that now. It's like
I feel like we've got a whole anthology right here. Trainwreck vampires.
Trainwreck vampires.
The vampire support group with all of the Trainwreck vampires.
Oh, that would be a great framing device.
I actually did.
Yeah, write that before Grady Hendrix writes it. Okay.
Yeah.
I actually did a superhero support group, funny like a humor story one time where like they were so bad at what they were doing that they had to go to a support group just to like figure their shit out.
Yeah.
Nice. So anybody else got anything? Because at least I've got some stuff. One idea I would bring up, but if anybody has anything else, I like to leave these things open so we can chat about whatever we want to chat about. And I think people find it interesting anyway.
I kind of wanted to go back to what you said
about. Well, I'm 100% for the.
Sorry.
I'm 100% for the whole. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Getting back to what Gary said earlier about your story is never going to be perfect, and that's fine. That's great. Actually, it helps you to grow as a writer. That was actually the whole notion of taking a story and revising it for a reprint. I kind of stole that notion from Caitlin Kiernan, who's written some absolutely phenomenal Lovecraft-inspired stuff. I'm not going to say she was a kind of a formative writer for me, but it's like I kind of I used to follow her blog for a while, and I kind of picked up some interesting sort of, not exactly tips and tricks, but just ideas as to how to improve as an author, not necessarily from a craft point, but from almost like a pragmatic point. And one of the things that she does is a lot of her stories, several of her stories have gone through multiple reprints in different collections. And one of the things that she does is she revises them for every single time that she reprints them. And that's something that I kind of picked up because it improves the longevity of the story. It keeps the thing fresh. And it also helps you to improve as an author because, like Gary said, the story that you write, it's never going to be perfect, and that's fine. Because, I mean, there's a certain point where you kind of have to take a step back and just let the story fly, because otherwise you wind up with a blank page, as it were, because you've added and subtracted and multiplied and divided the thing so many times. But I think there's always places that you're going to find in the story that would work better if they were done a little bit differently, and that's something that I don't mind doing, especially if it's something that has slipped out of print, because that kind of almost the nature of the beast, especially with independent publishing, is that some publishing houses will close down because the person running it moved on, whatnot. And I've had a few stories of mine slip through the cracks, but I've been fortunate in that I keep finding places that okay, this story might fit with this place, and just send it off to them. And I've had a lot of luck with Gary, which is why I've kind of started sticking with him. I mean, he comes up with great concepts for anthologies, and I've lucked out finding either looking at stuff that I've written that just needs a home, or stuff that had a home but kind of is couch surfing in my head for a little while. So it's been a great relationship, and I think
I feel the same way. I've not come across a story of yours that I didn't want to publish. So I like everything you've sent me. So yeah, I'm always happy to see your stuff come in.
Aw, that makes me feel great.
So what were you going to say, Elizabeth?
Look, that was like 3 minutes ago.
No, I don't remember. Behind something.
Your brain has moved on.
Exactly. I'm doing the tree now.
Actually, I don't know if you can hear him, but I actually got to head out of here and put my 1-year-old to bed. I don't know if you can hear him screaming.
Well, I'm glad you can make it.
Yeah, he makes life fun.
Go be a
Mhm.
responsible adult.
Yeah, how dare?
You'll be a dad.
I think we mentioned it. I think we mentioned it before we actually went on air that you have a 1-year-old and you might have trouble finding the time. So
Yeah, he makes it interesting. But it's always a pleasure. You guys
Yeah.
take care.
Good
Thank
seeing
you
you.
so much.
Take care.
okay, so
Children.
yeah,
I'll take Dan Klefstad for the block.
Hollywood Squares. Writer edition.
what I was going to ask? Okay, do you have any of you have any favorite weird fiction authors?
Besides
I mean, for
all,
me, it's obviously Lovecraft.
Mhm.
You know, I just have fallen in love with Lovecraft's mythos. Not necessarily the man. He was a very flawed guy, but a lot of his work is really, really speaks to me. I love Algernon Blackwood too, though.
Okay.
Gosh. I'm not sure if he counts as weird fiction, but he's weird fiction adjacent. I'm really fond of M.R. James's ghost stories, although I'm not sure that you necessarily would say they're ghost stories, because they're not necessarily ghosts as we kind of tend to think of them. They're almost more like elemental spirits as opposed to like the spirits of the departed or something like that. So I'm very fond of his stuff. Also, Arthur Machen. One of the first of his that I read was The Great God Pan, which was one of the inspirations behind Lovecraft's. Well, one of Lovecraft's stories is my all-time favorite, The Dunwich Horror. And I read Great God Pan, and I was just like, "Whoa, this is just." I was just blown away by Machen. I mean, he comes up with some very peculiar concepts, and just his way of capturing, the eeriness is just, it's just riveting, So those two, also Robert W. Chambers. I've written quite a few stuff inspired by the King in Yellow mythos, which is a whole ball of strange. And it's like I've read, the various stories that are adjacent to the King in Yellow, and they never failed to just kind of make the hair on the back of my neck just rise up and prickle. They're just very strange, but they're excellent. And it's like I think those three authors, I wouldn't say they're necessarily the formative authors for me, but they're at least among the classic authors. Besides Caitlin Kiernan, I'm also fond of the late great Joe S. Pulver. He's just a phenomenal writer. A very kind of almost like beat poetry kind of writing with some of his stuff, and others can be just plain, almost like a hard-boiled detective sort of narrative, but not the stereotypic hard-boiled detective narrative. It's like he just takes sort of almost like the air of a hard-boiled detective story and just applies that to just different scenarios outside of your typical tough, hard-headed gumshoe kind of characters.
Yeah.
Who else? Oh gosh. I've been on again, off again reading Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation trilogy. What was that, the Southern Reach trilogy? I think is the title of it. Anyway, I've been on again, off again. That beautifully written, but just so strange that it's the kind of thing. It's like I have to read a chapter or two at a time and then put it aside to kind of digest it, because it is just so weird, just wonderfully weird, but just very strange. Who else?
Yeah, I think in that vein for me, I mean, obviously Neil Gaiman's a big one for me, and it always has been, even all the way back to the Sandman. I think the strangest book that I ever read is one that everybody either loves or hates, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and that is Danny Lusky's House of Leaves. That book was just so damn good.
There was, okay, not to derail that, but there was a challenge on the internet a few years ago. People were challenging each other to read that book. And that was one of those, it's like I'd pick it up, I'd read it a little bit, and then I'd just kind of be just, and just put it aside. Well, I told myself, okay, there's other people doing this challenge. I'm not going to be, this isn't, fear of missing out sort of thing. But, this is almost like the universe telling me, you need to read that book, kid. So I sat down and read it, and I'm glad that it was almost like I had to kind of grow into it. But yeah, it's just, especially if you're like me and you live in a very strangely built old house with a lot of creaks and scratches and groans in the wall. I'm reading that thing late at night one night, during this whole challenge thing, and something scuffled in the wall, and I'm like, oh crap. That just, it was like, it didn't pull me out of it, but it just kind of like pushed me further into the book, if that makes any sense at all. So yeah, that's a very good, if you can get into it, I say it's definitely up there with, among the, I don't know, top 10 great weird fiction novels or what have you.
And one other one that may get missed is David Mitchell, who's more famous for like Number 9 Dream and Cloud Atlas, wrote a book called Slade House and the Bone Clocks. Both are very, very dark, very strange. One of them is about basically about a house that demands sacrifices, and it's just pretty much anything he writes is worth reading. But that one was surprising because I wasn't ready for it. I was not ready for him to go that direction with the book. It was very, very, it was unique, but it was really well done.
Have you all considered gonzo journalism to be a subcategory of weird fiction?
Oh, yes.
I, of course, having moved to Louisville, I've been diving into a lot of Hunter S. Thompson, native son here. And it was one piece he did for a famous magazine a long time ago. The Kentucky Derby is depraved and decadent, or decadent and depraved. It actually reads like weird fiction, and I'm sure only about 2% of what is actually on the page is actually happened. Or, I mean, it's just I really kind of appreciate the idea of just taking something that should have been a really good piece of journalism and just blowing it up into something that, of course, is absurd and where everything that happens could not possibly have happened in real life, but it makes a great story.
Huh.
Why would you ever want the truth to get in the way of a good story?
Exactly.
Well, and this is why I didn't complain as I was reading it. I thought, that's totally, I get it.
I'm aboard. I don't believe it, but
yeah, exactly. But I'm sucked in,
Hey, maybe it happened in a different universe, though.
Exactly. You never know.
Everything happened in a different universe.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking about my influences on weird fiction and stuff like that. And I have to be honest, the thing that comes to my mind is the television show, The Twilight Zone. The old original black and white one was probably where all of my interest in that got started. And, it hasn't been mentioned, but I think it should. Edgar Allan Poe, his short stories are like weird and creepy and horrifying and not supernatural for the most part.
Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a fair one.
Yeah, Twilight Zone and Night Gallery both were probably huge influences on me. So Rod Serling, and I remember having some little short story collections of Rod Serling stuff when I was a kid that I absolutely loved. So I don't know what they were, but I remember having them. He wrote some pretty crazy stuff, and you got, there were so many great writers involved in a lot of those old shows too.
There's a weird thing that happened for me in the remake Twilight Zone, the later series. Have you ever had this where you're watching an episode of a show like that and you think, man, this sounds really familiar, and then you remember that you read the short story that it was based on, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
There was one particularly that was a short story by Stephen King called Grandma, and I hadn't remembered reading it. It was a bajillion years ago, and then I saw it as an episode of one of these series, and it's like, whoa, this sounds really familiar. So,
here's a weird one. I don't know if any of you have ever had this. I had this recently. The movie Smile. Have you guys seen that one?
I've started it. Don't ruin it for me.
Okay, I'm not going to. Let me just say this. I watched it for the first time, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. And I had seen when I had seen the trailers, I was like, okay, some of this looks really, really familiar to me. And when I watched the movie, and then I had my wife reread the story. There was a story I wrote called Torment, which I think, Heath, you may have actually published in Forest City Stories. It might be in there, but I know it's in a couple of my books. And there are some striking similarities between that story and the movie. Now, there are enough differences, and I will not even imagine that this guy ever read my story, but it really has some serious parallels to it. It made me, I kind of went, I don't know, it was a weird feeling. It was almost like in some parts of it, it was like watching an adaptation of my story, and then other parts weren't. But have you ever had anything like that happen?
There are times when I feel like I'm standing on the bank of a river of ideas, and there's some lucky asshole 4 people ahead of me just scooping the same idea, but just a little sooner.
I've had instances where there's a book or a story that I've read that I loved it so much. There was like a part of me that wished that I had written it because it was just that level of awesome. But that's a completely different angle. So
yeah. I actually tried to get a hold of the guy who wrote and did Smile, and he never got back to me. Which
his lawyer told him not to get back to you.
Yeah, I'm kind of not surprised. I was very clear. It's like, look, I know you didn't copy me. I know you probably never read my story, but I'd just love to know where you got the idea for this, and if where we had, because I know exactly where the idea for my story came from. I can remember where it happened when I was having the worst gout attack of my life, and it was to the point where I was afraid that in the middle of the night I wouldn't be able to get up to walk into the bathroom. I wouldn't be able to get into the bathroom, so I slept on the bathroom floor to avoid that problem, and I hardly slept. And I remember I came up with the story during that time, but I was just kind of curious to find out where he had gotten the idea for it, and just sort of I don't know. It was like compare some crazy ideas. I don't know
there was a Stephen King story and movie, Secret Window, I think it was, where there's a major plot about that, someone stealing his work or vice versa, and it's not clear who wrote it first.
Interesting. But yeah, I mean, I have there's no way that I believe that he ever read it, so it's not like I think he copied it. I just think we sort of had some similar ideas that turned out differently, but
right,
which I think is really kind of cool, which is another reason I'd like to talk to the guy. I think we might have a lot in common and sort of hit it off as far as friends and fellow artists, but I don't know.
I've got Alicia Gray on the line here. He said he doesn't think it's cool.
Good one.
That's a deep cut right there.
But yeah, I don't know. That's a weird. I've come across a couple of other writers who have had similar things. A couple of my Facebook friends who I've done some work with before have said they've had similar things happen. In some cases, they hadn't actually published the thing that they had, but it was already written, and they're like, "Well, I guess I won't be publishing that now." At least mine was already published several years before his was out there.
Yeah, and I mean look at Tess Gerritsen with Gravity. That was a huge debacle years ago, where she wrote a movie called Gravity. She wrote a book called Gravity. They made a movie called Gravity, which is basically like the book that Tess Gerritsen wrote that was called Gravity. But they said, "Oh no, we didn't know it came from there. We just did our own thing." And I guess that held up in court. I'm not sure how that ended that way, but it did. So I mean, I think the reality is there are only so many ideas that people can have, and it's not so much about the idea; it's how you spin it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Even then, if it's been done, if you do it your own way, you're not really copying somebody. I mean, that's like saying, "Oh, you already wrote a love song, so nobody else can write a love song." Well, that's preposterous.
Right. Well, that's another point we brought up on the Tuesday chat, is that all art is built on the art that came before it, just like all technology is built on the technology that came before.
Sure.
So it's like some of these people get so bent out of shape about it, and they copied me and whatever. No, you know what? We're all working on the same cultural reference points and the same things. We've all grown up and been exposed to a lot of the same stuff, and it gets in your head, and you don't even really necessarily copy things. It just sort of goes into some other direction. You know, your brain works with it, and that's just how art works.
Yeah.
You know, it's part of the human thing. It's how it all evolves.
Yeah, isn't there some saying somewhere that there's really only 12 plots, or there's like 12 ideas that just about every story can be boiled down to, or something like that? I mean,
I thought it was 4, but yeah.
I've heard 12, but maybe there's 4. I mean,
Well,
okay.
here's 3. Anybody want to bid 3?
I can do it in 2.
It all boils down to the quest for tacos. That's it.
The guy who wrote Save the Cat said that there are plot ideas. Yeah.
Okay, that's where that may have been where I got it from.
I won't repeat. Dude with a problem is one, and then there's all. But yeah, I could get the book and read it for you.
I think it was Neil. I think it was Neil Gaiman said something about don't be afraid to write a story, even if you've seen a story that has an idea similar to yours, because this other author doesn't have the same experiences that you have. Your experiences are unique. Your way of looking at the idea is unique. So, or I know there's a little meme that I've seen on the internet. The concept of cakes. It's like, treat your story as if it were a cake. Everyone's happy to have cake. It's like nobody's gonna say, "Oh, there's 2 cakes here." Ugh. Just it's gonna be it's gonna be, "Hey, there's 2 cakes here." So hey, go and make your cake. Someone's gonna like your cake.
I'm gonna go with Elizabeth's taco theory, because tacos are life.
I'll be honest, not hating it. Not hating it.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll
Tacos
accept
is-
royalties.
So anyway, anyone have anything else you want to chat about?
Briefly, I was wondering, Gary, was there anything you wanted to say about my short story On Account of Murder, possibly coming out in another format or anything?
Yeah, okay. I didn't know if you wanted to bring it up. I'm fine with bringing it up. So for one thing, I should mention this will get. I'm going to get rid of the weird part where we didn't know if we were live yet or whatever. I'll edit that out. But this is going to get a bumper on the end and the beginning, and it'll go up on the Spooky Ventures channel as a spooky feature. I think in about 2 weeks from Saturday it'll go up. But that brings up the Spooky Ventures channel, which I run on YouTube. And for the last 3 years, maybe, for the 3 weeks leading up to Halloween, instead of, because on Mondays I always do audiobook videos. And what I do with those is I go out to LibriVox, where they've got the free audiobook audios of public domain works, and I use those and just put images in and do that for the audiobook videos. But for the 3 weeks leading up to Halloween, the last 3 years, I've done my own stories and just read them. And so Elizabeth approached me with the idea of doing one that she would read for On Account of Murder, and that one is going to go up. The first one of the 3 this year is going to be hers. So I've added a bunch of little graphic pictures, because she just did I do video on mine, but she just did audio for hers. So that's going to be pretty special coming up. I don't remember what the exact date is, but it's mid-October. That'll be going up on the Spooky Ventures YouTube channel. Is there anything you want to add to that, Elizabeth?
Just recorded on this microphone. I got this microphone to start recording stuff in audio cleanly, and did the audio version of my first of the trilogy novels, The Suffering Sequence. I just finished recording Girls Gotta Eat yesterday, alpha version, whatever you want to call it, and went out for dinner as a celebration this evening. So
awesome.
Good job.
Awesome. So and Dan, how's it coming on the sequel to Fiona's Guardians?
45,000 words, or about 200 pages right now. Fiona's Guardians was only 61,000 words, so I feel like I'm actually entering the home stretch. So my publisher, who just moved from England to Scotland, And I think the company literally was led by one guy. He was hoping to have it for this, next month, but there was just no way that I could do that. So we're looking at maybe next summer when it'll come out. Yeah. I should have
Nice.
more to say soon.
Nice. Anybody else want to add anything? No?
No.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up then. I want to thank you guys for all being here. We didn't wind up. It looked like there was somebody watching once or twice, but I'm not surprised with the headache that we had with connecting to Facebook. But the beautiful part is, as soon as we're done, I'll share the video because it's going to stay out on Facebook forever too. And like I said, it'll go out on the Spooky Ventures. It would have been more fun if we'd had some people commenting, but yeah, we got messed over by technical problems this time. So, but Spooky and Weird, a collection of weird fiction and poetry. You can get it at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound. Or if you type in talesofwonderandread.com, it'll bring you up to that section of the GaryHillAuthor.com page, or you can just go to GaryHillAuthor.com and head on over to the Tales of Wonder and Dread page part and find it. It's available in paperback and hardcover, but you can't have this copy because this is funny. This was my proof copy, and I'm really glad I got proof copies before I went because I actually did the spine wrong. I don't know if you can read it, but it actually, instead of saying spooky and weird, it says creepy and weird. And I looked at it and said, oh my God, how did I do that? So that's fixed on the other versions.
Maybe you didn't.
What's that?
Maybe you didn't.
Maybe I didn't.
Ooh.
Maybe a me from another universe did it.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, thank you, everyone. And
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
this was fun.
Elizabeth, Dan, nice to meet you, RC.
Nice meeting you guys too.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, very
Take
good
care.
to meet you all. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Keep it spooky.
Keep it spooky, always.
I regret nothing.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.